Welcome to this webinar on redefining qualitative research. Is AI leading us to a new paradigm? I have recently written a book chapter on it, so I spent some time thinking about it. And yeah, why I'm asking this question? Well, one is the reason as a possible explanation of what is currently happening in the field, giving the new technology that is around us, AI or generative AI, and a very long-standing interest also in Thomas Kuhn. I think, yeah, this is kind of also how my book looks like. When I read it 30 years ago, and I ever since was also very interested in the theory of science and and all that goes along with it. And so when generative AI kind of entered the scene and I kind of observed what was happening, I was immediately thinking about, okay, how does this relate to what Thomas Kuhn actually wrote in The Structure of Scientific Revolution? So we cannot really transfer this one-to-one, as we can see, but I think we can still map the procedures. And in this presentation, if you're not familiar with Thomas Kuhn, don't worry, I start by kind of going through these phases that you see here on the screen first, and then I try to map this on what's going on in qualitative research, especially qualitative data analysis, because that's kind of my field of expertise. So we have a phase of normal science, and in this phase of normal science, well, everybody kind of goes about their work. And Thomas Kuhn is a physicist turned philosopher. So it's all about natural science, what he wrote. So also these images are about the natural science. So we have an existing paradigm. So everybody has, within that paradigm, kind of a research puzzle to solve. So you can look at it as a puzzle, and then there is something there's a question mark, so people kind of pick up that piece of the puzzle and do some research about it. So everybody kind of goes around their normal work. And then suddenly certain anomalies occur. And well, this is an eye picture, so they haven't learned properly how to spell yet. If you said that ChatGPT 4.0 can spell better now, but we see it still cannot. But I think you get the point here. So there are certain observations that suddenly cannot be explained by the current paradigm. And in physics, it was the Newton paradigm, and there was something about the orbit of the Mercury and the speed of light that wasn't able to, could not be explained. And also some other things in other fields. So if you're interested in that, so there's lots of examples also in the book by Thomas Kuhn that suddenly, you try to apply whatever you knew so far, and that didn't, it didn't come out. So a first anomaly is usually always kind of explained away by, well, maybe we haven't, maybe the experiment was wrong, or we haven't really figured out the right way to do that. But if these anomalies kind of happen again and again and frequently, then suddenly we have a state of crisis, kind of like, oh, how do we, everything that we knew so far, it's not good anymore to actually explain what we are seeing. And then based off this state of crisis, then people actually look and experiment more and look right and left, maybe, and also at other disciplines, and see how, if we look at it from a different perspective, maybe we can then find a solution. So in physics, it was then Albert Einstein who came up with relativity theory that could then explain those anomalies that the Newton theory couldn't explain. So with that coming around, then people start to adopting this new theory. But that doesn't go without resistance. It's especially if people have been working within a certain paradigm for all their career, and now they're at the end of their career and suddenly something new comes. So it's a lot of skepticism evolved, and it's often more the young people who actually adopt the new view, and the old ones eventually kind of die out. But there is always this resistance going on with it, and it's, as Thomas Kuhn also said, it's not kind of a slow kind of moving over into this new paradigm. It's really two paradigms standing next to each other, and they're competing with each other, and so at first enough people actually have to apply the new paradigm to see that it actually explains things better before also the last persons are actually convinced to adopt it. And then once that has been done, everybody goes about their normal type of work again within that new paradigm, trying to picking up new problems and solving it within the new paradigm. So that's kind of a very quick run through the book by Kuhn. But of course, what we are more interested in, and I think also why you're here, so how does this now apply to qualitative research? Well, in qualitative research, also social science research for that matter, we have a diversity of theory that coexists. So we don't have, as it was in physics, we have Newton and we have new relativity theory and whatever comes next. So the whole field looks different. We have actually multiple paradigms exist next to each other. And here just a few. We have positivism, interpretism, Marxism, feminism, critical theory, and the like. And we also have methodological pluralism that reflects the different approaches. So it's not only like one way to go about it. And I also only focus on one. So I'm not kind of applying it to the entire field of qualitative analysis. We know there are all these different approaches, so my focus will be on coding. And another interesting bit, I think, where also it's more the idea that we can apply is at the very beginning of the book. Kuhn is describing what his aim is, actually what he wants to demonstrate with the book. And it's also about how textbooks actually kind of deceive or misleading what's going on, because once we are in a new paradigm, then everybody is reading the current textbooks and they don't know anymore how it was like 50 years ago. And I also can see that is going to happen, and probably also if you just think about the last 30, 50 years on also how what was done in qualitative research. Just to give you an example here, so I was, it's now a couple of years ago, and it was about archiving. I needed to teach people in one of the what are now called traditional Cactus packages on how to analyze archive data that then were digitized. And in that workshop, there were those people that in one of a rather famous study in our social sciences about unemployment, and there were the researchers who were now old and who were actually postdocs or PhD students at the time when the data were collected, and now new PhD students, whatever, 30 something years later, who were now working on their PhD. And they couldn't believe how data were collected at the time, because that was before the time of the tape recorder. So the senior researchers were actually saying, we talked to the people during the day, and then in the evening we were going into our rooms and writing everything down to a ethnographic type of study, and just from out of our memory. And now, well, we kind of if you kind of write that, maybe in ethnography some might go through, but in a lot of studies, well, no, you have to record and you have to transcribe and you need to have the words that they have been saying. You cannot just go, what kind of quality of data do you have? You just, it's all biased because you just write it up from your memory. So we won't find that in textbooks anymore, how to do high quality type of research. Just talk to some people, and then in the evening you just write some notes and what you remember in most qualitative studies. So that's also where technology had a great influence, where and of course there was also this discussion, what does the tape recorder do, and then later what does Cactus programs actually do to to our research. So we had these transformative shifts throughout, if we go back years back. And also maybe if you think through also anonymous leading to crisis, and that's kind of like until textbooks are rewritten. And if I think I wrote like 3 editions now of the book Qualitative Data Analysis with Atlas TI on coding. And there was also the need always to come up with a new edition because technology was advancing. So the last edition is from 2019. I'm not going to update that anymore. Because of course technology is also, moving also so fast, so you can't actually, keep up in book writing. But then also now we have this new technology ahead. But so my book is not going to be, some people still read it, but it's probably not that relevant anymore. It has, more some procedural elements, but all the how-to things and how the mouse clicks work, that's already outdated. But now if you're moving into AI, in the more people adapt AI technology, whatever, all these books that have been written on how to, use coding approaches and traditional programs like what we know, Atlas, MaxQDA, and Vivo, and a few others out there. In 20 years' time, well, my if you have followed me, you can say I have a very bold hypothesis, and I don't think it's true that in 5 years nobody's coding anymore, because it's going to take some time, and we will also address it in this presentation, until kind of people shift. But eventually, I think we won't use a coding approach anymore. So then textbooks will be written, and the new generation of researchers, maybe in 20 years' time, doesn't know anything anymore that we used to had to build these coding system and learn how to do that. So I'm focusing here on coding, well knowing that there are the approaches of data analysis as well, but it's a very prevalent approach. And I go through this rather quickly, but just to kind of give you a brief journey of why do we actually ended up with the term coding, or why we actually do code data. I guess we do code data because it seemed to be the best thing to do at the time when, with the given technology. And that was already in 1928, when it was figured out that it makes sense to kind of group things together when they were similar. So remarks concerning one topic can be grouped together. And also in marketing research, and they first starting about classification in responses to open-ended questions. So we find that in the Association of American Marketing. And then you might be familiar, at least I've heard these famous names or studies. Robert Merton also talked about developing an elaborated classification system to analyze unstructured data. Adorno also used the terms categorization, classification to report results. And then also in the middle of the 1950s, it became more mainstream. So more people started to use the words coding, and coding. We have the study Boyce and White, which, and that's where you need to know the background. So they came from a psychology department or field dominated by psychology. So there was this kind of pressure to make it more systematic. And so they also feel like it was necessary then to mark up field notes using colored pencil, and also then to describe what they actually did in a more systematic way. And then Becker et al. Also, just is a bit of name dropping here, but to kind of go with you through the area and how it developed, and people more often use the word coding. And coding, the street corner society, I guess, depending on which field you're in, it seems is probably also a well-known study here. So they also moved from case-based to code-based, and all of that had to do also with then the technology that was then introduced with the tape recorder, and the necessity of transcripts, suddenly having words of participants and being able to work code-based and not just based on summary description of cases. And then Glaser and Strauss came around. And this is also a journey that is described in the book by Fielding and Lee in a 1990 publication, I think it is, for 1991. And because the books became so popular, especially also then the second edition of Strauss-Corbin, they didn't, really, they just used these terms, but because grounded theory became so popular, so that actually led to a widespread adoption of the word codes and coding, and also in Cactus software. At the beginning, some people talked about, or some of the programs told about indexing, and but now if you look today, almost all programs talk about codes and coding. So it was then even more manifested with the event of Cactus coming around. So just here some quotes. I mean, I had another couple of slides that or quotes that I discarded here, but just go look in your either digital library or library of books that you have, and Johnny Saldana's book, it's now in the 5th edition, the coding manual. So it grew thicker and thicker and thicker over the years. Interestingly, and then I started talking about this, I recently met him at a conference, and he was also attending our panel where we talked about the future of qualitative research and AI. And he was also kind of thinking, I actually don't know whether I'm going to write the 6th edition, I think he is writing one, but whether he has to also start rethinking like what we're doing actually with AI, and whether his book on coding is going to be relevant for the future. Why I have this slide in here, it's also just take the slide, I don't duplicate it, but it's basically what we see also today. Now we suddenly, with AI, we can do qualitative data analysis at scale. But these were not the concerns about AI, these were the concerns about Cactus. It will distance the researcher from the data. Yeah, think about all these promises. You press on a button, AI is doing the analysis for you. Then, of course, if you think like that, it's a valid concern. There's also the concern about access and costs. Not everybody maybe have access to internet and tools like AI, because they're also quite costly to use, and we hope costs will go down in the future. Well, learning curves, I wouldn't be so concerned about that, but that was a concern with Cactus, that we have to learn all these tools, and also that the form is placed over the content. And this is a quote from a 1991 book: the community of scholars would immediately gather around the printout and celebrate its form rather than its content. And I think if you think about what you do with ChatGPT, or this discussion that have been around ChatGPT, and especially I know some Germans are in this webinar as well. If you think about the discussion we had on the FQS list, definitely there was a lot of concern about that it's not about content anymore, but that technology is taking over. So Cactus definitely has revolutionized the operational aspects of qualitative research and cemented the term coding basically as or coding as a method also of analysis. Here you see very ancient screenshots of these tools, so the very early tools like the SM graph. Well, this is noticed now in vivo. Now I cut this so much. Well, this is Atlas, and now I have to, maybe somebody recognizes those screenshots, but that's how they look like in the early days. So now let's move on. So now we were in that kind of normal phase of data analysis with coding. For now, well, the in vivo was noticed it's already 35, almost 40 years ago now that it was introduced. So we have now over 35 years of qualitative computing. So we could consider that really as a phase of normal science. This is, what people learn, and this is what you do if you do this kind of content thematic type of analysis. Or a lot of people also, of course, use these tools for ground theory analysis. So that is kind of also what you teach in your courses, and what I've been living on for years now, teaching people how to do this. Now, AI comes around, and then there are some anomalies that are going to happen. So we have some tools implementing generative AI and say, well, it can take over the coding now. Yeah, so press a button and voila, your coding is done. Well, it doesn't work quite that well, and I can tell you also a little bit around it why it doesn't really work. So we get almost 400 codes with 2 documents that are 27 pages, because it's also, if you have 30 documents like here in the last one, and they generate 400 codes, but the documents are only 2-3 pages long, well, then of course that's not much more than 2 or 3 interviews. So 4-hour interviews, that's almost 600 codes, 16 documents, literature. So you have documents that are about 20 pages, maybe a bit longer, generate 2,800 codes. And here we have these 30 short interviews and 7 are literature, articles from the literature, generating 2,347 codes. So what are we doing with that? Most of these codes have only been applied once or very few times, so the whole process of aggregating doesn't properly work. But I tried all of this, and you won't be happy of sorting through 2,300 codes. Even sorting through those 400 codes with those 2 documents took me longer than having coded it from scratch. So I practiced a lot of that, experimented with a lot of that, went with a number of people through several workshops trying these new technologies as they were integrating. So a lot of people are not really convinced that, at least not convinced in terms of the promises that are coming with them. It's more efficient, you're going to be faster. And with some of the other implementations, the general impression was, well, it's kind of a nice to have. It might be a second opinion if I don't have somebody to talk about. So it's a kind of nice to have, but it's not really speeding up my analysis. It might even slowing it down, because now I have that second opinion. So it's not bad that it's there, but it's not really revolutionizing everything that I've been doing. The other thing is also integrating this into traditional frameworks, so trying to stay within that coding paradigm. Well, it's constraining it. So it's always, even if now some have seen actually, well, my interaction might be kind of good to have, so you can start chatting with the document, but in the end you still have to do coding, because you stay within that existing paradigm. And then what I also notice is that researchers struggle to move beyond that, because that's what they have learned the last 30 years. So if you look at a lot of papers that have been come out the last year, so last summer there were about 3 papers, now it's growing and growing and growing. Most people tried with ChatGPT or ChatPDF or ChatDoc, whatever. There's some applications that are not necessarily written specifically for qualitative data analysis. And then they just try what they know. They know, oh, we need to code data. And they try to do that with ChatGPT. And then here you see some quotes. Let me maybe read them. Our examination of the platform in terms of the quality and granularity of thematic pattern is rather unsatisfactory when it comes to subtle nuances and contextual insight generally associated with qualitative research. And I think I can also tell you a few things about that. So turning to the NLP GPT method that they use, the model labeled each cluster with different names, even when it spoke about the same idea and only repeated the same names of codes only on a handful of them. Or the results were unsatisfactory. The AI's output was overly concise, with each code encapsulating only a single interview quote. So what are we doing normally when we code data? we read and attach a code. Then we read further and further, and then say, oh, if we rename that code up here and make it a bit more abstract, we can code that piece and that piece here as well. So as I was saying, coding is collecting. We need to collect the same instances under the same abstract code label. And that is what AI cannot do. It then, as what we see in the same one, it kind of uses then a different name for the same thing. That's why, as in the example before, we get like 2,300 codes, and some of these are probably synonyms of each other. And sometimes also very general codes. We get, this is about AI. Yeah, then we get a code that's about AI also. So it's not very helpful at all. So what we do when we code data, we start aggregating. Also, then when we at the 5th or 6th interview, we might still say, oh, there's something that's very similar to here, but we have to rename the code or restructure the code system in order then to capture everything that's in here and also in that other interview. So we constantly remodel the code system until we get to a stable code system. What a lot of these experiments are, and because people kind of then said, oh, we cannot do that with more than one document or 2 documents. Right now, with the more advanced tools the more data you can actually also upload, but there is still something that is called a context window. So you would never be able right now, I always have to talk about now, but upload 30 interviews and ask whatever, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever, or Claude, just develop me a code system, because it cannot analyze these 30 interviews in one go. And what these models do is, and a lot of people don't know that, once that you hit that context window, which ChatGPT right now is 128,000 characters, that's about four interviews, depending on the length, it's either starting to make up things, because if you ask it to code like 10 interviews and then it hits that context window after 4, but you have asked for 10 interviews, then they say, oh, I was asked about 10 interviews, so then it always gives us an answer. And then it starts making up things if it cannot go beyond. If it's a bit smarter, but depending on the tool, then it defaults to working with summaries. And that's when you get these flat codes or the flat answers as well. If you try to ask questions if your data is the amount of data that you want to analyze is too large, and if it defaults to summaries, then you get this very generic type of answers that doesn't tell you anything. That's what we don't want to do. We want to actually work on the original data set. But so this is what's now happening, that people try to kind of stay within the paradigm. They want to solve a problem, but it doesn't really work with the existing methodology. Also trying to use a general purpose tool like ChatGPT for coding and building categories. And then we also see resistance and crisis. Now, this is a quote from a recent email list exchange, that it was meaningful and creativity-based data interpretation becomes an engineering problem to be solved. And I think that I see a lot of misunderstanding in that quote, and I think also related to a lot of these promises. You press on a button, AI is doing this stuff for you. We can still meaningfully and creatively interpret data analysis if we don't turn over the power to AI. But this is thinking within the existing way of thinking, and not kind of like, okay, what does this new technology actually can do for us? Yeah, and then we see universities restricting access to AI functions. And I think also a lot of times because, well, they're afraid and they don't trust the privacy regulations, and they don't trust their people to use these tools properly. So very similar to what we have seen when the car was introduced. So what you see on that picture is actually a law that was created in England when the first cars were invented. So somebody needed to walk in front of the car in about 3 meters or 3 feet or whatever it was distance, carrying a red flag. And that think we see a lot right now. Oh, AI, what it does, and can we trust, and what's happening to our data. So we better kind of shut down everything and don't allow people to do that. So it kind of defeats the purpose. Yeah, like here, if we cannot ride the car with the capability of what the car is actually able to do, well, we can also benefit from it. So I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding, lack of knowledge, and also I think false promises that are around that what AI can actually currently do. So we need a new and fresh perspective, and one that I offer is a conversational approach to analysis, where the researcher is in the driver's seat and not the AI. It's not about pressing a button and the AI produce all the themes that are in the data. It's more using the AI as my extended brain. The AI knows it has the information about all the data, and instead of now having to go through a coding process, I can just ask questions. Where do people talk about trust? And pull that information out, or just start whatever your research is about, and start what you have been asking your respondents, and then work your way through. And the approach now that it's different is, given the current technology, is that you have to currently work case-based because of the context window that we have, and there will be probably more technical solutions for that. But right now, they're also very, very expensive. If you don't send summaries to an AI to solve it, well, you use up lots of tokens, and every token costs money. So even if you technically would kind of say, okay, let's just ask the AI to work document through document and document through document, it's going to be loads of context. And I'm still would still say, forget about coding. A general purpose model doesn't know how we code as qualitative researchers, and it would take a lot of work to actually train it to do that. So why, it's you kind of stop thinking about like, how do we use it for coding? It's more like thinking out of the box, saying it's not what do we want to achieve, and we have that new technology here. And then bringing those things together and forgetting about how we have been analyzing data the last 40 years, if we worked with the kind of coding approach. So this also challenges not only methodological assumptions, but also epistemological assumptions. So it's suggesting that knowledge can be directly and dynamically accessed and understood through advanced AI interaction, so that the AI is part of the picture that we actually included. And it represents a shift in beliefs how researchers can effectively comprehend and interpret reality. And we still need to kind of work on the answer of that. It's because it's kind of, some people concerned because whatever the language model knows are a reflection of what we have been feeding it, and so whereas the subjective experience was in it and so on. So there's still a lot of question to kind of think through, and how we think about this shift now, and also in how we can actually generate knowledge with that new entity on the table, basically. And I think that resonates again, returning to Kuhn with his insights on how we adapt new technology. Just quote, a decision between alternative ways of practicing science is called for, and in the circumstances that decisions must be based less on past achievements than on future promises. So we don't know yet quite how it works. So we still need to figure out and ask a number of questions that we haven't answers for. And but not looking at how we have been doing things, but thinking with the new technology and looking into a future promise. And what I've seen when I'm talking, every time I'm telling people to forget about coding, we have to think about something new, or even a lot of people playing with ChatGPT and have been playing with how to analyze data, and they haven't seen how they might do it differently. So I've been interviewed by somebody, and he summarized my interview, and then came up with a very nice headline for his newsletter, and it was "The Great Unlearning." And I think that what needs to happen when we adopt AI as a new paradigm in analysis, we need to unlearn how we have been doing things without not yet knowing how this is going to look like in the future. And that's maybe a bit of the tricky part. So in conclusion, and this gives us a bit of time of discussion. Sorry, I managed not to talk too long. So the incorporation of AI into qualitative data analysis is not just about technological advancement, but also about the willingness of the field to embrace a new method that could expand and deepen our understanding of qualitative data analysis. And I think similar as it was with also in the natural science, with when a new paradigm came around, that a number of people have never adopted it and retired without actually working within the new paradigm. And we might still see here that a lot of people might cling onto coding, and it's probably more the younger people who embrace new technology. And I think also that's happened with Cactus, and we still it's now over 35 years, as I mentioned, and still some people have never heard about Cactus. So it's going to be a gradual process of new people maybe be more adventurous and more affine to technology and adopting it, and gradually maybe not pushing out, but exchanging the old ways or the current ways actually of how we do things. So this shift requires an openness to evaluate established practices and this bold vision for the future. And in Kuhnian terms, this is how revolution begins. And for myself, I'm actually glad and happy to be part of it, and to have the opportunity. I'm always saying I've been a little bit late to the Cactus revolution. There was like this famous meeting in 1989 in Bremen, Germany, and I started to get to know or into it in 1992, and now I have been now in a position to actually being at the start of the revolution and shaping it, hopefully, and take some of you with me. So now it would be actually happy if some of you would speak up. Also, if you don't agree, or if you have questions, if you have a completely different view, I'm happy for a discussion, also to challenge my views, because it's not, it's ideas, and I'm putting them out there.